Pushkin. Giles Martin may be the son of famed Beatles record producer Sir George Martin, but he's also an acclaimed record producer and composer in his own right. He's won multiple Grammys and an Emmy for his work across TV, music, and film. He's worked on projects with the Rolling Stones, Elton John, and Metallica, and is celebrated for his work remastering albums from the Beatles, including Sgt. Pepper's, Abbey Road, and The White Album. Last October, Giles' remaster for Revolver was released along with never-before-heard home demos and outtakes from the Beatles. Giles was able to separate the original 1966 mono recording tracks with the help of director Peter Jackson's audio team, who used AI technology. Giles' resulting mix allows listeners to hear with clarity and precision the original recordings like never before. On today's episode, Rick Rubin talks to Giles Martin about his approach to remastering the Beatles and the responsibility that comes along with it. Giles also talks about growing up in the music industry and how he became his dad's ears in studio sessions when his father lost his hearing. This is Broken Record, liner notes for the digital age. I'm Justin Richmond. Here's Rick Rubin in conversation with Giles Martin from Shangri-La.
Tell me, growing up in the house that you grew up in, we've never talked about this before, so this is interesting. What's it like growing up in such a musical household? Let's start like that.
Well, it's really hard. Like, people say to me, what was it like growing up having George Martin as a father? And you go, well, I never had a different father. I never had a different dad, so I don't know. But it was, I'll tell you what the difference is. And this is what I try and encourage my kids and other people with kids, is like, music wasn't something that was distant from me. Like, playing an instrument wasn't something that was a stranger to, because my dad would sit and play the piano. In fact, when I was about 4 years old, they said in my play group, what does your dad do? And people go, my dad's a lawyer, my dad's a whatever it is. And I'd say, my dad just sits home and plays the piano. And I think he was writing the music for Live and Let Die, the Bond film at that time. I think that was, if I look at the era, it was around about 1974. So music was a natural thing. What's interesting, the Beatles didn't really exist in my household. It was not that they were banned from the house. I mean, we had a copy of Abbey Road, and that was it, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I do, because it was something he did.
Understood.
And, you know, you've always been progressive in your life.
Yeah, you don't bring your work life home.
Yeah, but it's what you did, what you're interested about, and what you're doing and what you're going to do. Yeah. And that's what people don't realize. Was
your dad home a lot, or was he at studio daily? Like, tell me what were days like?
It's hard to. It's a long time ago.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, he was pretty good. He always said that he wasn't around enough. It was interesting. I had a nanny. I had a male nanny there was a 70s band called Stackridge he worked with, and the drummer from Stackridge was unhappy being the drummer in Stackridge and looked after us kids. So I had a drummer as a nanny. And my dad would be at the studios, but I would go and see him. I mean, he was at a place called Air Studios, which is in Oxford Street. It's where Nike Town is now. If anyone's in London, they go to Oxford Circus. Nike Town is where, and it was the top of that building. And I remember as a kid, he had two offices. He had one, he was part of Chrysalis Records at the time, and that was obviously a record company. And I just found that really boring going to see him there. And the other was the studios, which, you know, went up an elevator to quite high up, probably the fourth floor as far as, you know, us Brits goes, which is really high up for us. And there were corridors, and there was a long corridor. At the end of the corridor was a hot chocolate machine, and it was free. But on the doors of each corridor, there were rooms where things would happen. There were rooms where there would be musicians and speakers and noise. And I could sense, even then, as like a 4 or 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, I could sense that this was different from an office. This was different. This had a different feel to it. It was perfectly natural for me to be in that environment because I didn't know any different.
What would be the music playing in your household other than your dad playing piano?
Well, here's the thing. We didn't have a stereo system in our house because my mum didn't like speakers. My dad used to.
She didn't like the way they looked or the way they sounded or
the way they looked.
The way they looked.
We did eventually get a hi-fi. So me and my sister had a record player, and we would listen to, and we would get records. You know, we weren't. I don't think we were terribly spoiled children. We get quite often. Records we got were records from my dad or labels and stuff like that, and it would vary. I remember we used to listen Even the Quietest Moments by Supertramp, which was an album that came out, and it was Peter Henderson was the engineer. like who we knew, or there was like a Carole King album called Chicken Soup and something or other. I always thought Carole King was this sort of New England housewife that made things. Then I worked with her, I met her, and I realized that she's more like Dr. Ruth, funny enough. As a character, she's brilliant. Carole King, she's fantastic. Like this hot wire. There were these records that, I was aware of. We had a Stan Getz album because he worked with Stan Getz. And so we had these albums that my dad had made, and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, for example, Jeff Beck, Blow by Blow. These albums they were the albums because they were free, and then obviously as kids you end up buying Bowie records. And I remember I was obsessed by Transformer by Lou Reed, for instance, all these records. But I remember my dad, my abiding memory is my dad sitting outside our house in the car and listening to the work he was doing because we didn't have a stereo at home in our living room, as it were.
So many people do listen to music in the car. It's not a bad place to listen to music.
No, it's good. As you and I both know, it's a good place to check mixes.
Absolutely. That's what
in fact,
we do.
less so now, funny enough, because cars now do stuff to audio that we don't want them to do. But
Usually you can turn it off, though.
Yeah. But it's not like, wait a second, audio has become more sophisticated, at the same time less sophisticated in a way. Yeah. And technology companies decide to do things to our music that maybe we don't want to do. Yeah. They usually want to go, I want to listen to the car because I want to listen to what it sounds like simply.
It's an interesting thing to talk about. I know that was a big, when the Beatles catalog was streamed, when they decided to stream for the first time.
Yeah.
You were involved in the way that was handled, and it was different than the way most other, maybe all other music was streamed. Tell me about that.
I never planned on being involved with the Beatles. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter, guitar player, and circumstances happen that, nepotism rules, or, whatever it is. And so I have been, ever since the Love Project, which I did in 16 years ago, been involved in that. And the streaming thing came up, and I have this view. I'm a bit like the kid in Mary Poppins that wants to feed the birds and not go to the bank. I think music should be available to people, and the Beatles was held off streaming, maybe because of quality, but probably more so because they're thinking about, okay, how do we sell box sets, and how do we? I'm going, there's kids that have no idea what this music is because they're not buying records, and we have to accept that. That's it's neither good or bad. It's just it is. People don't listen to albums anymore. Well, we can't judge how people. You want to make things available to people. That's what I believe. So when the Beatles went on streaming, I just said I used the power. There's like a bullying power with the Beatles, saying, okay, if you want to be on streaming, let's make sure the quality is as good as it can be. And I don't believe in that thing where people go, you can't. Artists go, you can't enjoy music because it's not good quality. I listened to cassettes. Cassettes were my thing. I like to be cool, and so I had vinyl, but I was of the generation that had cassettes. I had a cassette, not even a Walkman, like a really bad player with those orange headphones that only did fast forward and didn't do rewind, and I have to turn over the tape to get. That's what I had, and it came with 3 speakers. 2 little speakers came in the same box.
Yeah.
But I listened to records on that, which I fell in love with. They sounded like, to me, it was like I didn't need anything else. Our mind fills in the blanks. We can fill in the spaces that are there. But you might as well make things, if they can be good, make things as good as they can be. That's what we do in studios.
Absolutely.
So with the Beatles, I went to Spotify, I went to Apple, I went to whoever would take me and said, okay, how do we make the system better? How do we get rid of normalization, which compresses music? How do we make sure the codecs are good? And so I started working on that with them.
Let's talk about what you found out about the way the standards were done that you wanted to override. Because again, it's interesting and nobody knows this. I only know it because you told me about it.
There's this thing called normalization where everything needs to be the same level. And it's like life. If everything in life is the same level, you're neither happy or sad. I want to feel stuff. I don't want to, I may be very English, I sound English, but I'm emotional. I care about stuff deeply, and I cry about things. And it's the same with music. That's what music to be. We don't want it to be the same level. We want it to be surprising. And I went to go and see Spotify in Sweden, and we talked about the process of imbibing music, how they take the music and how they put it out, and making sure this doesn't happen. And they agreed. And what's interesting, there's the thing in the music industry where the artist, and that's another question about how the artists are dealt with, but there's the thing about people perceive that these companies don't care, but they do care about it. They really do. In my experience, they have teams, and they want to know how to make it better, opposed to going, We don't care about it. And that's what I found. So with Apple, they were developing new codecs. They came to see me when they did their Master for iTunes thing. And because of the way I grew up being my dad's ears, because he went deaf, and I was in studios listening for a long time, and I knew what 1 kilohertz sounded like maybe at too early an age. And I remember saying, I met a guy who was head of core audio at Apple, and we did a listening test down at Bob Clearmountain's place in Santa Monica, and they played me a remaster of something, I think it was A Day in Life or something, and I just said, I'm hearing a weird compression at like 400 hertz, and I'm also hearing this leveling out at 9 kilohertz. And they looked at me like I was some pretentious, which is fair enough. Yeah. And I just go, I can only say what I'm hearing. And then this guy, Bill Stewart, William Stewart, who was the head of, he said to me much later, he goes, the weird thing is we just thought you were mad. But I said, to the team, we should. And he goes, we found it. We found what you were talking about.
Yes.
Like we found, and I went, well, okay. Listen, I don't know, Bill, but I mean, I can only tell you what I hear. But the great thing about that is then they engaged, and then they said, okay, how do we make things better? How can we? And I get seen. I mean, 2 years ago, someone came to see me from a company and said, it's completely transparent. And silly enough for them, he had an A/B situation. And I won't tell you what streaming service it was. And I said, no, I'm hearing something around about 7 kilohertz that's not. And he said, but people can't tell the difference. And I said, no, if I walked into a room and you played to me, I wouldn't tell the difference.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's the difference.
Yes.
But if you're
let's get it right.
But if, but now I've got a button. Immediately I can hear what's going on.
Of course.
But that's not the point. Let's get it right. And so I find that in that world, the people want to engage. And it's just making sure that getting rid of all the BS around it.
Yeah.
And there's a thing that I get attacked for occasionally. I have a pretty good run of stuff, but like about compression and limiting. People have been compressing and limiting records since records were recorded. By the nature of recording, that's what happens. I mean, my dad flew over to Capitol in LA because the Americans were so much louder than the English. I mean, they still are socially. No, they're so much louder. They're so much louder than the English. And he went to the Come Fly Me sessions with Frank Sinatra. There's my dad. No one ever knew he was there. He was young and wet behind the ears
to see how they were doing.
To see how the Americans could be loud, because in those days, everything was listened to on a turntable, and the American records would come on the radio and they'd be louder than the English ones, and they wouldn't know. The EMI wanted to know why.
Yeah, I'm accused of, there's this whole loudness war debate.
Of course.
And I always wanted my things to sound loud because I want them to be like the Beatles. The Beatles were always louder than everybody else.
But you always made records that sounded beautiful. I mean, and always will.
That's my goal.
And always,
I try my best.
And always will do. It's like, people want to listen to your records because it doesn't matter what it is. They just, and... It's funny. I went to a guy from this team of hi-fi experts came to see me. This is down at Abbey Road a while back, and they had this conversation with me. And I said, records have been compressed for a long time. And I said, I try and not make I try and have dynamics. We talked about the feel and stuff like that in a record. I said, but really, it's really only from like 1972 to 1980 that there was this sort of less compression. I and I said, so if you're trying to sell me your hi-fis, what would you play me? And they went, Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits. And I was like, okay, I think it's 1977. They went, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And you go, okay, it's 74, 73. I went, so your theory is that the only music worth listening to is from this like 6 years, 7 year period of time. And you realize how crazy that is.
Yeah. Tell me about the normalization process that they were doing. Was it a compression or was it matching levels?
It was matching levels, but it has to be done. The problem is with all of this is that I don't think it was done on the input stage. So if it was on the input stage... So it was
actually... when you make something loud quieter, there's a way to do it where you're retaining all of the information, and there's a way to do it where you're actually removing information, removing resolution to get it quieter.
Exactly. So that's what was going on. So there was a digital compression happening in order to make the track the right level.
Yeah.
And there becomes a sound to it.
Yes.
And there becomes a sound that's then accepted.
Yes.
And it's a very difficult thing to negate. And it's really, here's the thing. And I can sit here now as now just turned 53-year-old man and go, that's the reason why records don't last as long. But the same point is that, when Revolver was made, They didn't plan on it lasting very long.
No.
That's the thing. You just go. So there's a tangible sort of inner turmoil that goes on in us on our mountaintops judging this thing. But the only thing I would say, and the only thing that I think is really important, is that as time goes on, technology is a wonderful thing. That's the thing. People think it isn't. Technology is you can be in a situation, even with spatial audio, even with that, you can bring someone closer to the artist. You can have that directness. You and I are talking now, and we're talking on good microphones, and we're having this conversation, but it's not the same as someone being in a room with us. And so we, or much better people than us that make records now, will be in a situation where they can create something, and it should be as close as to what they want someone to hear. With technology, with everything going on.
Yes.
What's happened is sometimes we move further away from that.
Yes.
Because of the way it's being delivered and the way it's being done. And because of presumptions by technology companies that that's the right thing to do.
Yes.
And so, I get given keys to things, like I'm now head of audio and sound for UMG. So one of my roles is to look at this stuff and go, okay, this is Universal Music Group for anyone, but to go, okay, how do we create this transparency? There's no agenda here. There's no I'm not trying to sell more records. I'm not. My role is purely, how do we create this transparency?
It's almost like a preservation.
Correct.
It's a preservation.
But it's also
role.
preservation looking forward as well. It's not just a question of me doing what I do with old records. It's like I'm more interested in what people are doing with their records, and go, okay, you need to make sure, music used to flow out of us,
yes,
or flow out of artists, and be in a stream. And now it's in a waterfall. It's like this cascading, collapsing waterfall. Everyone's being hit by things all the time. You can't change that. But what you can do is reassure the people that spend hours, days, and weeks working on something that it can go to someone who loves your music in the best possible way. It's like,
Absolutely.
who wants a cold pizza in a box?
Absolutely. And one of the things about the well-meaning technical advances, what they can do is you can listen to a piece of music and then they press a button that would be like the equivalent of, let's say, a loudness button. Everybody knows what the loudness button does. So you press the loudness button and it seems like you might like that better. But you might like that better on some pieces of music and not others.
Yeah.
And if that loudness button was universally put on everything, where you no longer have the button or the choice to turn it off, it's one of the things actually with Sonos that I recommended early on with Sonos. Sonos has a built-in loudness button and it comes on. And I suggested it should come off.
Yeah.
And you can turn it on if you want it on. But the first thing I do when I connect a new Sonos speaker is turn off the loudness button.
Absolutely.
Because it sounds more like what the record sounds like.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, that's designed so a loudness button in that case is designed so it adds more bass at lower levels, not high levels. It's the same thing as I remember when having a car which had a variable volume limit for how fast I was going. Do you remember those?
Worst. It makes me crazy. Most cars have them.
Yeah, it's like wait a second.
Especially if you're listening to mixes while you're driving, it makes you crazy.
It's just, and actually I was listening to a Shanti mix the other day, this artist, and it was like, and I was listening to on a system, and with the mix engineer, and it's like, loads of 808 kick drum, loads of things, and we were checking out this, and I said, did you mean to make the vocal louder here? It's very brave. And he goes, no, it's meant to stay the same. And what happened? The system was compressing. And this is the thing about compressing and limiting. The system was compressing. So once the 808 and all that heavy low sub was removed from the track, when the guy was rapping, when there was no, it meant his vocal just came up. And I was like, well, that's not right. Yeah. That's an example. So, I mean, I said to her, like a senior engineer at Apple, who's a good mate of mine. I said, this is when they released a product, and the same with Sonos and all these. Like they said in their blurb, we remix the sound. I go, never say, if you want the artist, never say your product remixes the sound. Just say we are I want there to be a completely flawless window.
Yes.
And let the sunlight shine through into our homes. That's what I want. Or open, just a flow. And I don't want anything between it. That's the thing. And bizarrely, you have to do a lot of technical stuff to make that happen.
Yes.
That's the key.
Yes. And it's interesting how even certain things like vinyl, it's really fun to listen to vinyl, but I can't say that vinyl's more accurate It's just another filter. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's maybe a filter we like.
Yeah.
Same is true with tubes. It's like tubes sound great, but they sound like tubes. They don't sound like the music.
It's like, here's the thing. It's like, I remember, the first Beatles album that they asked me to remix, and I was against remixing any Beatles album. I've got to be honest with you, but Paul and Ringo said, we want, can you do this? And I said, well, I'll do 3 tracks, and then we listened to them and they liked them. And I was like, and it was Sgt. Pepper's. And so I remixed Sgt. Pepper's. And I really spent a lot of time over this stuff and thinking about it, because I'm basically painting a moustache in the Mona Lisa. I'm doing stuff a lot of people a lot of people who are better than me would like to be doing this job. And B, a lot of people who love this music would like me to not be doing this job. Yes. So I'm walking this fine line at the same time. And I'd done it, and I looked at it, and I was wondering, is it too bright? Is it too loud? Is it too... And eventually I'm happy with it. And then we cut the vinyl. And to me, it sounded really good. It sounded better than and I found it annoying because, I like to be in control of stuff. I wasn't in control of stuff. I cut the vinyl. Even the stereo imaging sounded better to me.
Yeah.
It was like, what's going on here?
Yes.
I don't know, but that's a filter. It is a filter.
It's a filter. And in all these cases, there's the arguments that vinyl is closer to, it's like, no, it's not. No. But you might like it more. It may be technically better, but it's not closer.
And there's a whole generation of records, from what Dre was doing.
Yes.
Which the way that shifted wouldn't have been able to shift if it was still on vinyl.
Yes. Or if it was still on tape.
Yeah, because the amount of bass and low end wouldn't exist.
Yes.
They wouldn't exist. It just wouldn't, that's the interesting thing. It's not better or worse. It just is.
And it's just different.
Yeah.
And you use the equipment that you have. That's another thing, is like the excuse many people we see, they feel like they can't do it because the equipment changed. Yeah. It's like, it really is the artist and the listener, and whatever's in between is not so important. You know what I'm saying? We can use our best efforts to use what we think sounds good, but to say, well, if I don't have a Neve console, I can't make a record. So it's a ridiculous idea.
I have a friend of mine who's a great mix engineer, and I was producing a band when I was 23, deeply unsuccessful. I'm doing a really bad job because I didn't know what I was doing. It was at Rack Studios in London. Mm-hmm. Which is a great studio, old API desks and stuff. And he was in the room next door, and he was working in a band in the 90s. And it sounded great, what he was doing. I was like, I'd go back into my room, and it sounded terrible. Yes. His room. And we became friends. And, and he actually said one thing. He goes, once you learn how to make things sound good, it gets kind of boring. So you have to work out, I try not make bad sound. I don't think I make bad sounding records. I kind of know why. But he said to me, he goes, I mistrust anyone who walks into studios and saying, I can't work in the studios. Especially nowadays, we have everything.
Yeah,
we have everything, and it's like I'll tell you what makes great sound is great musicians.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's like I worked on the first Jubilee concert back in 2002, which Brian May played guitar on the roof for Buckingham Palace, and we had as the artists, and Stevie Winwood was one of the artists, and he wrote to me and he was going to give me some loving, and was like the band was like, it was like Phil Collins on drums and Pino Palladino on bass and Ray Cooper on percussion, and it was one of those very English kind of charity events. And Stevie Winwood was one of the nicest guys in the world. And he gave me CDs of each part of Give Me Some Loving for the band to learn, which he'd done MIDI, like on like DX7 or something like this. And he sent me this demo, like Pino said to me, he goes, I think I know how the bass line from Give Me Some Loving goes. I was like, gave him a CD from Stevie Winwood. And it was like on a key, like dum 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 bum 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 on a keyboard. But then he sang obviously on some like answer phone on this track. And it was the weirdest thing. It was this terrible backing track, which is a terrible MIDI backing track with Stevie Winwood singing into, and it was like, he could sing into anything and he would sound amazing. Like Joe Cocker, like these artists, he was on the concert as well. But there's these singers, like the reason why people go, even with me with Beatles, I go, that, the White Album sounds great. It's like, that's because it sounds great. I mean, thank you, but honestly, I'm pushing faders up, and
yes.
And as we move on, that's the unfair thing. You start and you go, you work with people who aren't very good, and then you get to work with people good, and you make good records. And we get a lot of credit for stuff that is just, people sound good.
People sound good.
People sound good.
People sound good. And if we're in the lucky position to get to cast the people who are playing,
yeah.
And if we pick the right ones, it sounds really good.
Yeah, it's like that's the key. More than any microphone.
Yeah.
Or more than any compressor, or, we have favorites, like equipment we like to use. but you have to start off with the right ingredients.
Yeah, I was lucky to work on a session that Ringo played drums on, and he played smaller drums than most of the drummers that I work with.
Yeah.
And he seemed to hit the drums more casually than most of the drummers I work with. And the sound that came off the drums filled the room in a tremendous way that was different than everyone else.
Oh, really?
And it's just it was the nature of the way he did it.
Yeah.
It was in his hands.
Yeah.
In his body is where the sound was.
Yeah, I sat in a room doing a concert with Joni Mitchell once, and she just played the guitar and sang, and like as close as we are now. It was like I couldn't work out where the music was coming from.
Yeah.
I literally couldn't work out. It was like it was emanating from her. And and I love that. I love the fact that we look for that secret, what's the plug-in? And I love the idea that you could take someone, you could train them to be Joni Mitchell from the age of 5, and they would never be Joni Mitchell.
No.
There's a spirit. And without sounding pretentious, our job is to capture that spirit and pass it as part of,
and to not get in the way of it.
Not get in the way of it.
No,
absolutely
to protect
right. It's
it,
like,
really.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, even like with the legacy stuff I do with the Beatles, I get to walk into Abbey Road and I get to put the tapes up in the same way you did with Paul.
Yeah.
And you listen to stuff and you go, well, how lucky am I? This is really touching me. How can I take stuff off this so people can hear it? Do you know what I mean? Opposed to how can I get my sound up? That's
it has nothing to do with
nothing.
us.
You're just basically, you're just passing things down. And it's the same when we come to the streaming thing. The next stage is the streaming thing. How can that be passed to someone? So here you are. Here's not a cold pizza in a box. Here is a delicious thing for you to enjoy.
Yes. Let's talk about the White Album a little bit. The White Album that you did was 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. Well, and I did, because I did the whole Peter Jackson
the
Let
big
It Be
deluxe,
thing.
big,
Yeah,
the big White
two
Album.
years ago, I think. Yeah,
I felt like it was about to, because I've been wanting to talk to you since then.
Oh yeah,
because it really blew my mind. White Album might well be my favorite of all albums.
Yeah,
and when I listened to the new mix of it, it didn't feel like a remix.
No, well, it shouldn't.
It didn't. It felt like I was hearing this album that I've been listening to my whole life, all the time, that I was hearing it for the first time. And that was a remarkable experience. Like I'd never actually heard it all before.
Yeah.
It was like a blanket was taken off the speakers and I could actually hear the clarity of what was happening. And it was an amazing experience.
Oh, well, thank you.
So tell me, technologically, what happened to allow that to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. The answer is, well, a number of things, but there's no real one thing that you apply. And it's certainly not anything to do with cleansing or cleaning material, because I don't believe in that. Yeah. Like even when the White Album is predominantly 8-track, there's a couple of 4-track, and I let the bleed from the other tracks come through, because otherwise it becomes, sterile.
Yes.
But the White Album, like all Beatles albums, was made for vinyl, and it was made in different rooms and at a fractious time. So it's quite often it was mixed out of anger, and mixed by Ken Scott and Chris Thomas, who are both brilliant. I mean, like Ken Scott went on to do Hunky Dory and Transformed by Lou Reed, amongst other things, and Chris Thomas is one of the greatest producers. But it was done in a fractious time. I think George Harrison or Giles Martin, my dad, told the story when they were doing Savoy Truffle. My dad walked into Studio 3 at Abbey Road, I think they were in. Ken Scott was mixing it, and my dad goes, "It sounds a bit bright, George." And he went, "Yeah, I know, and I like it. Like, get out of here," that kind of thing. And so it was made at a time where it was like the fractiousness is on the mix, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So therefore, maybe, and I have to walk a tightrope here because I'm dealing with, a something people hold dear. Sometimes the translation of what was intended on the White Album, like the aggression or not the aggression, is leveled out, a bit like we're talking about what streaming services do. It comes now sometimes too compressed, sometimes too bright, sometimes whatever. So I'm having to mix this material, but I'm trying to mix it bearing in mind what they want. Because don't forget, I am also, Ringo and Paul are still alive, and Olivia Harrison and Danny Harrison, Sean Lennon and Yoko. So I am working for them, playing to them. But my intent is to go, okay, how do I do as little as possible and get you to be in the room with the band? Because one thing about the Beatles and the Beatles records, and I've worked on lots of other, I've done, I think I've mixed Rolling Stones, I've done Beach Boys now, there's certain artists a bit like an autopsy, you open up the body and you find out it's not in great working order. You need to sew it up and put it back together as quickly as possible.
Yes.
The Beatles aren't one of those artists. Yeah. You open it up and you realize there's beauty that lies within.
Yes.
There's performance that you haven't quite heard yet. And that's what I try and focus on. You try and focus on it. So the answer is not a technical one. It's an emotional one. It's like, wow, I didn't realize that this was them live in the room. So how do I make it feel like the wonderful work you've done? Like the great thing about what you've done is you celebrate the musician in all of your work. In all of your work, you celebrate the musician. And I've learned from you from doing that. I learned from you from watching like the Chili Peppers documentary that was made way back then with Blood Sugar Sex Magic, that thing in the house.
Yeah.
We all wanted to be you or be produced by you, Rick. That's the thing. And it's the same thing. So I walk into, forget the fact I'm my father's son. I want to be on those sessions because I'm a musician and I'm a producer. That's what, it doesn't, my dad has nothing to do with this, but he does.
Yes.
He's a spirit that's with me. So I just go, okay, Rick, you can't be with me listening to this stuff. So how can I get you close to that? So how do I mix this so it's like you haven't heard it before, you have heard it before. And I'm really careful to A-B the old and new. So it's not, I remember, I really respect Bob Clearmouth. He's a genius, but I remember he mixed All Right Now by Free, and I was into Humble Pie, I was a guitar player.
Yeah.
And there was like the cowbell was loud and the snare drum sounded different. I was like, no, that's not what I want. I wanted to.
Yeah, you want it to be what it is.
Exactly.
But what it is where you haven't heard it
and
before.
There's a weird.
That's why I don't understand. That's why I'm asking. It's not like the levels are different. It's not like the sounds are different, but you can hear it in a way you couldn't hear it before.
But it's kind of like in that mode, I'm kind of remastering in a really complicated way. That's what I'm doing. I'm remastering individual tracks and putting them back together again. It's like there's a weird psychosomatic thing that goes on here. Like, so I've just done Revolver, and the response to Revolver's been like the White Album has been, but there's like a finger snap in Here, There, and Everywhere. And I heard this. I don't remember the finger snapping Here, There, and Everywhere. Not that I listen to the Beatles. I don't listen to the Beatles on my spare time. But I was like, and I think, well, I put it there, and I go, okay, maybe it should be here and come and then you listen to the original and go, oh, there it is. There's a weird psychosomatic thing. People go, you make Ringo's drums louder, and I don't really.
Yes.
But for some reason, there's the impact, and I think what it is the limiting and compression I do is slightly different from what they did then because I have more time. And let's face that, I also have what they did before to A/B. I learned really. So my first Beatles experience was the Love Project, and that was basically out of desperation because I was working on records, I think successfully, but things I didn't want to do. And I said, listen, I reckon I can create a show that never happened just by chopping up the tapes. And they went, okay, you've got 3 months, we're not going to pay you. And I went to the album and I remixed I'm the Walrus. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a genius. This is great. And just out of interest, I listened to the original. And it sounded so much worse, but was so much better than my record, than my mix. It was so much better. It was like claustrophobic and dark and distorted and mono and stereo. And I was like, no, what I've done is boring. And it's preserving that. It's like things don't have to sound great. They just have to sound right.
Yeah, maintaining the spirit of what it originally was.
It's really important.
Yeah.
Because then it's like the amazing thing about the Beatles and the people that worked on the Beatles, these great engineers, and my dad is, they did things really quickly, but they did things so right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's funny, I saw Paul about Revolver and I was playing him Taxman. And he goes, no, your guitar is just, the guitar solo which he played, I think, is it could be more aggressive. And I was like, it's really aggressive on the original. I was like, okay. And he goes, I know it's too loud in the original, but it should be too loud.
Yeah.
And that seems like Fresh by Sly and the Family Stone is a terrible sounding record, but a great sounding record.
Yes.
It's a great sounding record because it's mixed in the way it's mixed. It's like, and I speak to mixers like Tom Elmhurst and all these people go, I don't believe in what you do. And I really respect what they say. And it's absolutely right. I mean, they don't listen to what I do, but you don't understand. I'm not trying to correct a mistake or something like that. I'm trying to, and the one thing is that regardless of what you or I think, it gets people talking about stuff and then gets people to listen to stuff and gets generations going, having arguments about it. And then they engage. They don't just hear it, they listen to it.
Yes. I understand that for the Revolver there's a new technology available that hasn't been available before that allowed this to happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Tell me about that.
So the pandemic hit, as we all know, and I was in the middle of working on the Get Back project with Peter Jackson. We started working on that before the pandemic, and it was meant to be a 2-hour film, and it became a 7-hour, 40-minute extravagant. Peter, who I love, and he's become like a really good, a good friend. He loves a trilogy. He can't avoid a trilogy, but it gave us time to, like a bit like wartime. It gave us time to look at technology, and the Get Back project was recorded on Nagra tape, which is this 1/4-inch, these little brown reels of tape, and not sunk to picture. We had to sync everything to picture. And this tape had Paul and John talking with George playing the guitar, and he has a dialogue editor called Emile Delaray, his name is, which is a great name, who had looked into AI using actually American police force research about how you can remove transients or things from different recordings. So he started taking the guitar off Paul's voice or John's voice or Ringo, and it started separating these elements so they could make the film, and the film became what it is, and it's been really well received. And during this, at the end of last year in this process, so I was mixing the film, I was mixing the music for the film, and I suddenly had these elements. I said to him, okay, maybe we should have a look at Revolver. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, if I send you track 1 from Taxman, which is guitar, bass, and drums together, can you separate them? He goes, yeah, I think so. And I went, really? He went, yeah. And I said, well, you look at it. I'll tell you what transients I'm missing, what things I'm missing. He did the first pass, and it's pretty amazing. I said, there's a couple of things the guitar hits I'm not. And we started collaborating on this process. And it got to the stage where, I kid you not, and I'm happy to play it, the drums, guitar, bass, Taxman guitars with the snare drum. I could have drums on their own where I can hear the squeak of Ringo's kick drum pedal, the bass separate, guitar separate, and all the transients there. So then he could separate the kick drum and snare drum, and the snare drum hits. I kid you not, Rick, it's like a snare drum, a sampled snare drum. It has the tail, has everything, and I don't know how. I can claim credit for it. No idea how it happens. It's AI and machine learning, and what it does is the computer will recognize what the sound is. But really important to me is that I can then put all these elements together and play the original tape and sync them up and reverse the phase, and you hear nothing. So there's no artifacts, there's no distortion. I mean, this is an idea of what that is. So if I reverse the phase on something, it means it's the same thing. If I add a little bit of EQ to one, you start hearing it. You start hearing something because it changes. There's no changes happening. And it means it opens up the door. What's interesting is it opens up the door to a whole load of magical recordings that are out there. Not that they should be destroyed in any way, but just so new generation hear different things, or great singers that haven't been heard can be heard, or even like people can be sampled and used for stuff. It does open that doorway.
So you're basically taking a finished record that's in, let's say it's in stereo, taking that stereo and with no back material, turning it back into the components
Correct.
That it was made from.
Correct.
And then you have those individual components that you can put back together in either the same way or in a different way.
Yeah, it's like being given a cake and then suddenly, you handing me back flour, eggs, milk, sugar, whatever's in the cake.
Yeah.
But they're pure.
Yes.
That's the difference. A lot of people have done this before, and I did a film with Ron Howard, this Beatles film, 8 Days a Week, where I had to take screams off.
Great movie, by the
way.
It
was great. Thank you. It was great.
That's a great
But
one.
to get the sound, to get any form of sound, because this is like the Washington concert it sounds awful. I mean, it's to get, I had to do some demixing, and just so you could hear the band, but it was still really rudimentary. It didn't sound very good, and it was like I had to really put it back together again. With this, we're getting to the stage now where the drums from She Said, the band have never heard the drums from She Said because they were guitar and bass. Yeah. But it's like, if I played you the drums from She Said, which have been in the studio we're in now, you go, hey, Giles, that's a great sounding drum sound.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's something like Revolver. We're used to the stereo mix of Revolver wasn't actually the stereo mix. The stereo mix of Revolver was done in the 80s by my dad at Air Studios in Montserrat. You know, people finally go, how can you destroy history? Because it's not actually even history.
Yes.
It was done with lexicon reverbs and stuff like that.
Yes. So the original, it was mono.
Yeah.
Mono was the version.
Well, mono was the version because
Of all of them, even.
because, yeah, but-
Even to the end,
Yeah.
mono was still the main version.
absolutely, because people didn't have stereos.
Yes.
You know, mono and vinyl are the
Yes.
version, I think, and I think that's right. I think if you
The stereo was almost like an afterthought. The stereo version of the recordings were, let's just say, had less focus.
yeah, and like no one's listening to the stereo because like radio wasn't stereo.
Yes.
You know, we're in this world now where we have all the music in our world in boxes in our pockets, and we have everything everywhere. But you know, if you want to access anything, you're listening to something at home. You're listening to a mono. You know, people wouldn't have heard stereo, and that's why, you know, interesting or not interesting, early stereo was just crazy. I mean, good fun, but it's kind of crazy, you know. And actually, in America, stereo is a much bigger thing than it was in England. So the early Beatles albums that people know, where all of the bands on one side, all the vocals on the other side, and people go, "That's great." My dad was so angry about that when it happened, you know, because Capitol took the records and did this because they wanted stereos because that was the new thing. It's like the new.
But they
the new
didn't do it in
gimmick.
a musical way. They just did it in a
They just did it
technical way.
Exactly right.
I've heard rumors, I don't know if this is true, that the reason that the things were separated the way they were was if you played one of those funny, odd stereo through a mono system, it sounded better. I don't know if that's true.
Oh, really?
That was the theory of why Capitol did it, was because that's what sounded better on the radio. I don't know if that's true.
I wonder if that's a response. That's a response into the English saying, "Why have you done this?"
Yeah, maybe.
And they went, "Well, because
Maybe.
if we play this,
Could be an excuse.
Yeah.
But it'd be fun to do the test. see
Yeah,
what
it would
does.
actually
Yeah,
see
yeah.
what it. Yeah, it's that thing about, like, you know, when you take a mono, it's this thing when they were remastering some mono stuff. I just said, just take one side. Don't take both sides and put them together.
Yeah.
So you're going to get some sort of phase.
Yeah.
It's mono.
Yeah.
Take one side.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
You know, so with that process, and this is the thing that I battle with, is that I've had a really happy time of things because people have accepted what I do, you know, which is amazing. And I never thought they'd, you know, I thought I'd get my house burnt down.
Material you're doing, it could be catastrophic.
Yes.
So the fact that
It's not.
the fact that it's not is a really good sign because you really are playing with fire.
Well, I think that's one of my great marketing things, is that Giles Martin, not catastrophic.
Yes.
That's what I
No,
go for.
but you're given the tools
Yeah.
to really do damage.
Yeah, no, yeah, I try my best. But then, and it's the weirdest thing nowadays. It's like, I'm the person who talks about Beatles albums, and the Beatles. They want me to. It's like, you know, I was in XFM in New York talking about Revolver, and Ringo was in the morning before night, and they went, "Hey, Ringo was in." I was like, "Was he?" And they went like, "Yeah." He says, "You know, we love Giles the best." And I love Ringo. Ringo, as you worked him, he's great. He's like, he not only is he one of the best drummers ever to have lived, he's also one of the nicest humans ever to have lived.
Beautiful
he's like,
man.
Yeah. I was like, why am I talking about Revolver? And he's, you know, it's that thing. But the technical aspect of it, everyone wants to know about the technical aspect. I'm feeling going, yeah, but it doesn't matter. Just listen to the music. You know, that's the thing. It's like, yes, there's with Revolver, for instance, and I hope people like it. It's had like I did an interview with the Sunday Times, and the guy said, I mean, you know, I listened to it with my son, and it's my favorite album, and I loved it. I said, Giles, it's great. It's like it was mastered a month ago. I went, it was mastered a month ago. And it's this weird kind of thing, but I want people to listen to the songs. It's that thing is like with the Beatles, because the Beatles, it's the same with the streaming thing. I use, maybe not even a Machiavellian way, but I use that influence they have as a catalogue to try and make all of it better. Do you know what I mean? That's if I'm going to be given this privilege, I might as well, like, you know, the interesting thing about the demixing process is not necessarily it's amazing that we do this technology, which is helping me mix Revolver by the Beatles, and it's one of the greatest albums, whatever. But for things like stuff by Dre, there's things that stuff on MPCs or Akai samplers in the 90s, people don't have their assets.
Yes.
You know, Tom from the Chemical Brothers phoned me. He wants a remix Setting Sun by the Chemical Brothers. And he goes, we just can't find the drums, Giles. And you go, okay, there's artists that now can have their things back.
Amazing.
And so that's what I'm going. That's what we're going. Okay, how do we make this available to people? That's what I'm into. I'm not into the elitism of it. I mean, it's the Beatles, so it's elitist, but I much prefer it to be
for everybody. Yes,
absolutely.
And it's a great tool, and for the people who also happen to catch the best version of something at the demo recording, and it was just on a DAT or digital recorder, and that's all you had was the digital recording. Yeah. And it doesn't really sound as good as it can, but the performance has never been beat. Yeah. The fact that could now be turned into a proper recording is very exciting.
And there's so much stuff. Even, I mean, I was asked to remix when I was in my 20s. I worked with NXS, since they became friends of mine. Now they asked me to go and mix something, and no one could find the vocal to this track.
Wow.
And it's like a really well-known song.
Wow.
And so, hey Peter, can you have a look at this? And it's like, here's your vocal back. Just things like that.
Amazing.
The incredible thing about what I get to do is I get to get a 1-inch 4-track tape out of its box and put it on a machine, press play, and it sounds the same as it did when it was recorded. And with the Beatles stuff, there's no baking, there's no restoration, and I don't want to digitally cleanse something. I don't want to, because it ages things. It's like it's like plastic surgery on someone's face. It'll change the quality that's there. In the world of what our legacy of what we've done and what you've done, how many recordings that you play back can be played now? I mean, that's the thing that happens. It's like, even the Love Show in Vegas, after the 10th anniversary, we redid it. And I was working on Pro Tools 9, creating this thing. Mm-hmm. I couldn't open the sessions up. Yeah. Like, we had to go back and get an old computer. And, it's that. But somewhere from 56 years ago, get out the box and press play.
Amazing.
There's more of Rick and Giles' conversation, so be sure to check out part 2 next week, where they talk about the glory days of George Martin's studio that was built next to an active volcano in the Caribbean. They also listen to a song from the remastered Revolver album, and Giles talks about his father's surprising punk rock values. You can hear a playlist of Beatles songs remixed by Giles Martin at brokenrecordpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced with help from Leah Rose, Jason Gambrell, Ben Tolliday, and Eric Sandler. Our editor is Sophie Crane. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like the show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.